In 2002, the most dominant American personal computer maker of the 1990s was swallowed by Hewlett-Packard in a bitter $25 billion merger. Compaq Computer Corporation had been the fastest company in history to reach the Fortune 500. They were the engineers who cracked IBM's iron-fisted monopoly on the desktop. Throughout the late 90s, their beige Presario towers dominated the aisles of CompUSA and Circuit City, defining the exact physical shape of the American family desk. But the acquisition erased Compaq as an independent giant. The retail workers who stocked their boxes and the users who trusted the brand watched the name slowly degrade into a badge on budget laptops before vanishing entirely. The paradox is that Compaq did not disappear because it failed to build good hardware. It disappeared because it taught the market how to make computers cheap and was eventually crushed by the very price wars it unleashed. But the real story of Compaq is not only the story of a corporate merger. It is the story of how America bought the personal computer and what happened when the machine became more important than the brand that built it. Every week, we tell the stories of American devices, platforms, software, stores, and screens that once taught the country what the future felt like and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story of Compaq begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place, in a Houston pie shop, in 1982. The story begins in Houston, Texas, in 1982. At the time, the American computing landscape was dominated by a single, monolithic force: international business machines. The IBM personal computer, a computer designed for one person to use directly, usually at a desk or in a home, had launched in 1981. It had immediately legitimized the desktop market, turning what had been a hobbyist curiosity into a mandatory tool for the American office. IBM's strategy for the PC was unusual. Instead of building everything in-house, they assembled the machine using off-the-shelf parts. The processor, the main chip that performs calculations and executes instructions, was made by Intel. The operating system, the core software that manages the computer and lets other programs run, was licensed from a small startup called Microsoft. Because the physical components were publicly available, competitors immediately realized they could build machines with the exact same hardware. But there was a trap. IBM had heavily copyrighted one specific, crucial piece of the machine: the BIOS. The basic input/output system was the foundational code embedded on a chip inside the computer. It acted as the ultimate translator, waking up the hardware when the power was turned on and telling the operating system how to talk to the screen, the keyboard, and the disk drives. If a competitor built a computer with an Intel chip and Microsoft software, it was not truly an IBM clone unless it had the exact same BIOS. If the BIOS was even slightly different, popular boxed software would crash. In an American tech market where business users were walking into computer stores and buying expensive physical boxes of software like Lotus 1-2-3 or Microsoft Flight Simulator, a machine that could not run those programs flawlessly was entirely useless. The American user did not want a computer that was almost compatible. They wanted 100% compatibility. And IBM's lawyers were fully prepared to crush any company that dared to copy their copyrighted BIOS code. This was the insurmountable wall facing three former Texas Instruments engineers, Rod Canyon, Jim Harris, and Bill Murdo, when they sat down at a House of Pies restaurant in Houston in early 1982. They wanted to build a new kind of machine. Instead of a heavy desktop tower bound to an office cubicle, they envisioned a portable computer that a business traveler could carry on an airplane or take to a hotel room. They sketched the initial design on a paper placemat, but to make this portable machine viable, it had to run IBM software perfectly. It needed an IBM-compatible BIOS, and they could not steal it. To solve this, The engineers executed a grueling, high-stakes legal and technical maneuver known as clean room design. The company they formed, Compaq Computer Corporation, hired two completely separate teams of programmers. The first team read IBM's published technical manuals, analyzed how the IBM BIOS behaved, and wrote down a highly detailed list of specifications. They documented exactly what the code did, but not how the code was written. Then, they handed those specifications to a second team of programmers. This second team had never seen the original IBM code. They were legally isolated in a clean room. Their job was to write a brand new BIOS from scratch that achieved the exact same results based only on the behavioral notes. It was an incredibly expensive gamble. Compaq spent a reported $1 million, a massive sum for a new startup in 1982, just to reverse engineer this single chip legally. The tension in the Houston office was absolute. If the second team accidentally wrote code that looked too much like IBM's, Compaq would be sued into oblivion. If the code was not perfect, the software would not run, and the machine would fail on the retail shelf. But the clean room gamble worked. Compaq had successfully cloned the DNA of the IBM PC without violating the copyright. In November 1982, Compaq announced its first product, the Compaq Portable. It officially shipped to American stores in March 1983. The device was massive by modern standards. Weighing 28 pounds, it was roughly the size of a portable sewing machine. It was built into a rugged plastic suitcase. When a user unlatched the front cover, it dropped down to reveal a full-sized mechanical keyboard. Inside the casing sat a built-in 9-inch green phosphor CRT monitor and 2 slots for floppy disks, removable magnetic storage mediums used to load software and save files before hard drives were standard. Priced at nearly $3,000, it was not cheap. But for an American sales executive or traveling accountant, it was a revelation. It could fit under an airplane seat. It could be carried into a client meeting. Most importantly, because of the $1 million clean room BIOS, it ran every single piece of IBM software flawlessly. Compaq also made a crucial decision about how the machine would reach the American buyer. Instead of building their own stores or selling directly to customers like IBM often did with its enterprise clients, Compaq partnered exclusively with independent computer dealers. In the early 1980s, computer stores were springing up in strip malls and downtowns across America. Compaq promised these dealers hefty profit margins and swore never to undercut them by selling directly to consumers. The dealers in turn aggressively pushed the Compaq Portable to anyone who walked through their doors looking for an IBM. The reception was explosive. In its first full year of production, Compaq sold over 53,000 units of the Portable. They generated $111 million in revenue. At the time, it was the most successful first year of sales for any company in the history of American business. The founders who had sketched a heavy plastic box on a diner placemat had not just launched a successful product. They had fundamentally broken IBM's absolute control over the personal computer ecosystem. The code was clean, the machine was ready, and the American market was about to learn that they no longer needed IBM to buy an IBM computer. For the first 3 years of its existence, Compaq played a highly profitable game of follow the leader. They were the premier manufacturer of IBM clones, but they were still entirely reactive. IBM would release a new standard, and Compaq would build a high-quality, portable, or slightly faster version of it. The American computing market assumed this hierarchy was permanent. IBM invented the future, and everyone else manufactured it. But by 1986, the underlying architecture of the personal computer was changing. The balance of power was quietly shifting away from the companies that assembled the metal boxes and toward the companies that supplied the internal parts. Intel, the California-based semiconductor company, had just finished developing the 80386 processor. It was a massive leap forward. The new 386 was a 32-bit chip, meaning it could process data in chunks twice as large as the previous generation of 16-bit processors. This extra bandwidth allowed computers to run multiple programs simultaneously and handle increasingly complex, memory-heavy software. Normally, the American PC industry would wait for IBM to introduce a computer using this new Intel chip. Once IBM set the physical standard, the clone makers would scramble to copy it. But IBM was hesitating. A cheap, incredibly powerful 386 desktop computer threatened to cannibalize IBM's highly lucrative mini-computer division, the expensive refrigerator-sized machines that corporate IT departments relied on. IBM decided to delay their 386 PC. Compaq realized they did not have to wait. If they bought the chip from Intel and the operating system from Microsoft, they could engineer the rest of the machine themselves. In September 1986, Compaq staged a massive press event in New York City and unveiled the Compaq Desk Pro 386. It was a staggering, aggressive move. For the first time, a clone maker had beaten IBM to the next generation of computing. The Desk Pro 386 was not a portable suitcase. It was a heavy, slate beige desktop tower. It featured a rigid, angled front plastic bezel, a deeply recessed floppy disk drive, and a humming internal fan that became the ambient soundtrack of the late 1980s American office. Paired with a heavy mechanical keyboard that clacked loudly under the hands of financial analysts and programmers, it was a physical manifestation of raw processing power. Priced at nearly $6,500, the Desk Pro 386 was not a machine for the casual home user. It was aimed directly at the American corporate cubicle. In the hands of an architect, it could run early CAD software, computer-aided design programs used to draft blueprints. In the hands of an accountant, it could recalculate massive spreadsheets in Lotus 1-2-3 in a fraction of the time it took an older IBM machine. But having the fastest computer was only half the equation. Compaq's true breakthrough was its absolute mastery of the American retail and distribution system. In the 1980s, people did not buy quincy, complex business computers online, and very few bought them through mail-order catalogs. They bought them at physical dealerships, specialty retail chains like Computerland, Businessland, and Sears Business Centers. These stores were the gatekeepers of the American technology market. If a store manager did not recommend a computer, it simply did not sell. Compaq understood this system better than anyone. IBM frequently angered these independent dealers by selling computers directly to large corporate clients at a discount, cutting the local store out of the profit. Compaq made a sacred vow to its retail partners. They would never sell directly to a customer. Every single Compaq machine, whether bought by a local dentist or a Fortune 500 company, would be routed through an authorized dealer. In return, the dealers rewarded Compaq with absolute loyalty. When an IT manager walked into a Computerland store in 1987 looking for a fleet of high-end machines, the sales rep steered them past the IBM section and pointed directly at the beige Compaq Desk Pro towers. Compaq had weaponized the retail shelf. IBM realized they were losing control of the standard they had created. In 1987, IBM attempted to lock the market back down by releasing a new line of computers called the PS2. The PS2 line introduced a proprietary hardware bus known as micro-channel architecture. A hardware bus is the physical connection on a computer's motherboard that allows users to plug in expansion cards, printed circuit boards, that add features like better graphics, sound, or network access. IBM's new bus was technically advanced, but there was a catch. IBM patented it heavily and demanded steep royalties from any competitor who wanted to use it. Furthermore, it was not backward compatible, meaning it could not accept the millions of older expansion cards already sitting in American offices. IBM was telling the market to throw away its old hardware and pay a premium to stay inside the IBM ecosystem. Compaq refused. Instead of paying IBM's ransom, Compaq orchestrated a stunning industry rebellion. They gathered 8 other major computer manufacturers, including American hardware giants like Hewlett-Packard and AST Research, to form a coalition that the tech press dubbed the Gang of Nine. Together, they engineered their own alternative hardware bus called EISA, Extended Industry Standard Architecture. Unlike IBM's proprietary system, EISA was an open standard. It cost nothing to license, and it was perfectly backward compatible with older hardware. The American market looked at IBM's expensive closed system, and then looked at Compaq's open, compatible system, and chose Compaq. This was the pivotal moment the personal computer landscape fractured and reformed. The term IBM compatible began to fade. It was replaced by a new reality, the Wintel standard. As long as a computer ran Microsoft Windows and an Intel processor, the physical box could be built by anyone. Compaq had not just beaten IBM to the next generation of computing. They had seized control of the standard itself, preparing to put a beige tower on every desk in America. By the early 1990s, Compaq had entirely rewritten the rules of American hardware. They had broken IBM, established the Wintel standard, and secured the loyalty of corporate IT departments from New York to San Francisco. But the American desktop was no longer just a tool for accountants, financial analysts, and software engineers. The 1990s brought the dawn of the multimedia era and the consumer internet, and Compaq was perfectly positioned to capture the American home. Under the aggressive leadership of CEO Eckhard Pfeiffer, who took over in 1991, Compaq shifted its strategy from high-margin premium corporate machines to massive, relentless volume. The company's growth was violent and unprecedented. Compaq became the fastest company in history to reach the Fortune 500, a testament to an American economy that was rapidly and eagerly digitizing. By 1994, Compaq officially overtook IBM and Apple to become the largest manufacturer of personal computers in the entire world. This dominance was most visible inside the sprawling footprint of American tech retail. In the mid-1990s, buying a computer was a highly physical weekend ritual. A family would drive to a big box retailer, CompUSA, Circuit City, Best Buy, or a local Computer City outlet. Walking through the automatic glass doors, the customer was immediately confronted by aisles of beige hardware. And Compaq owned the most valuable real estate in the building. Through aggressive dealer agreements and sheer manufacturing muscle out of their Houston factories, Compaq ensured their boxes were stacked high at the end caps, forming literal barricades of inventory on the showroom floor. The crown jewel of this consumer push was the Compaq Presario line, introduced in 1993. The Presario was not a utilitarian metal box meant to hide under a cubicle desk. It was explicitly designed to be the centerpiece of the American living room, or a dedicated family study. The physical footprint of the system was massive. It often featured an all-in-one design or a heavy, slate beige tower paired with a matching CRT monitor, a cathode ray tube display that weighed over 30 pounds and housed a deep, heavy glass vacuum tube. It hummed constantly with the sound of internal cooling fans. Crucially, the Presario embraced the new multimedia reality. It featured a built-in CD-ROM drive, a laser-red optical disc format that could hold hundreds of times more data than a floppy disk, allowing for heavy encyclopedias like Microsoft Encarta and high-resolution video games. Compaq partnered with premium audio brands, often bolting custom JBL speakers directly to the sides of their monitors. When an American teenager pressed the thick plastic power button, the machine booted up with a loud, reassuring chime, signaling that the hardware was ready. In an American house where the family computer once sat in a shared room, the right device did not merely run software. It decided who could go online, who could talk after school, who could make a mix CD, who could work from home, and who felt that the future had finally arrived. Compaq owned this ritual. In dorm rooms across the country, college students used Presario laptops to log onto university networks. In suburban bedrooms, teenagers used the built-in modem to dial into AOL, waiting for the screeching digital handshake that connected them to the web. Compaq was no longer just selling a machine. They were selling the physical gateway to the digital world. The Houston campus expanded into a massive, sprawling corporate empire, pumping out millions of machines to keep the retail shelves full. Compaq had conquered the physical desktop, but the sheer weight of feeding the American retail machine was about to expose a fatal flaw in how they built the future. While the Presario conquered the American home, Compaq's grip on the corporate world tightened into an absolute stranglehold. By the mid-1990s, the American office landscape had been completely transformed. The era of the secretary pooling documents on a single terminal was over. The new standard was a 1-to-1 ratio. Every employee, from the accounting department to human resources, required their own personal computer. And more often than not, the machine sitting on that particle board cubicle desk was a Compaq Desk Pro. IT departments, the technical teams responsible for buying and maintaining hardware for entire companies, trusted Compaq completely. The machines were over-engineered, heavily tested, and notoriously reliable. But Compaq was not satisfied with merely owning the desktop. They wanted to own the hidden infrastructure that connected those desktops together. In 1993, Compaq introduced the ProLiant line. This was a server, a powerful, specialized computer that provides data, websites, shared files, or applications to a network of other computers. Before the ProLiant, American corporate backrooms were dominated by massively expensive proprietary mini-computers built by IBM or Digital Equipment Corporation. These legacy machines cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and required specialized training to operate. Compaq applied the exact same Wintel philosophy to the server room that they had applied to the desktop. They built the ProLiant using standard Intel processors, allowing companies to run off-the-shelf networking software at a fraction of the cost. In windowless, heavily air-conditioned storage rooms across America, the massive IBM mainframes were quietly unplugged and hauled away, replaced by racks of beige and black Compaq ProLiant servers. Compaq had successfully commoditized the corporate network. The momentum reached a fever pitch in August 1995, with the release of Microsoft Windows 95. The launch of Windows 95 was not just a software update. It was a cultural event that triggered the largest hardware replacement cycle in American history. The new operating system demanded more memory, faster processors, and larger hard drives than older machines could provide. Millions of Americans realized their current PCs were suddenly obsolete. At midnight on launch day, customers lined up outside CompUSA and Best Buy stores across the country, not just to buy the software box, but to buy entirely new machines capable of running it. Compaq was the primary beneficiary of this frenzy. Their manufacturing plants in Houston, Texas, operated around the clock, churning out tens of thousands of units a day. The company's revenue skyrocketed. By 1997, Compaq was selling over 10 million computers a year. They commanded a staggering share of the global market, dwarfing traditional rivals like IBM and Apple. They were generating tens of billions of dollars in revenue, fueled by an American economy that believed the internet was the ultimate frontier, and a Compaq machine was the vehicle required to reach it. But beneath this incredible scale, a dangerous physical reality was beginning to strain the system. Compaq's entire empire was built on the traditional retail distribution model. To put a computer on a shelf in an American mall, Compaq had to predict the future. They had to estimate exactly how many people would walk into a Circuit City in Ohio 3 months from now and want a specific model of the Presario. Based on that guess, Compaq would buy millions of dollars worth of Intel processors, memory chips, and hard drives. They would assemble the machines in Texas, pack them into massive cardboard boxes adorned with the red Compaq logo, load them onto fleets of diesel trucks, and ship them to retail warehouses across the country. Once the boxes reached the retailer, they sat on the shelf waiting for a buyer. In the technology market, physical inventory is a ticking time bomb. A computer is not like a piece of furniture, it is a highly perishable good. Every single week a computer sits unsold. The components inside it lose value as newer, faster technology is introduced. To keep the independent dealers happy and loyal, Compaq offered price protection. If Intel unexpectedly dropped the price of a processor, the value of the fully assembled Compaq machine sitting on the CompUSA shelf immediately dropped as well. Compaq was contractually obligated to cut a check to the retailer to cover the difference in value. As long as the machines were selling incredibly fast, this massive, heavy, slow-moving supply chain worked. The sheer volume of sales masked the extreme cost of moving so much physical metal across the American continent. By the end of 1997, CEO Eckhard Pfeiffer stood at the helm of an unquestionable titan. Compaq had shattered IBM's monopoly, established the industry standard, pioneered the home multimedia PC, and conquered the corporate server room. They were the undisputed king of the Wintel era. Compaq had conquered the physical desktop, but the American computer market was about to teach them a brutal lesson about what happens when hardware becomes cheap. The first crack in the Compaq empire was entirely invisible from the crowded aisles of CompUSA. It did not start with a broken device, a bad motherboard, or a failed software launch. It began 3 hours west of their Houston headquarters, inside a buzzing telemarketing call center in Austin, Texas. Throughout the late 1990s, Compaq was fighting a brutal, unwinnable war against gravity. The company had built its entire fortune on a specific physical retail model. They manufactured millions of machines, shipped them to independent dealers and big-box electronics stores, and waited for American consumers to walk in and buy them. But a younger Texas company, Dell Computer Corporation, had fundamentally rewritten the rules of American tech distribution. Dell did not sell through stores. They sold directly to the consumer via mail-order catalogs, toll-free 1-800 telephone numbers, and eventually, a highly efficient website. This direct sales model exploited the most dangerous reality of the technology market. Physical components lose value every single day. A processor, the expensive brain of the computer, depreciates rapidly as chip makers like Intel constantly release faster versions. In Compaq's retail model, it took roughly 2 months for a machine to travel from a manufacturing plant to a retail warehouse, and finally, to a shelf at Circuit City. By the time an American family actually purchased that Presario, the internal components were already older and cheaper than the day they were assembled. But Compaq had already paid full price for them. Dell, on the other hand, operated on a system of zero inventory. When a customer called Austin to order a PC, Dell had not even built it yet. They only purchased the processor, memory, and hard drive after the customer's credit card had cleared. By the time Dell bought the parts, they were cheaper. They built the machine in a few days and shipped it directly to the user's front door. This structural advantage created a lethal price gap. Dell could offer the exact same Wintel performance as Compaq, but for hundreds of dollars less, while still making a higher profit margin. Compaq was trapped by its own success. Their retail partners, the thousands of American dealers who had built the company in the 1980s, were now a massive financial anchor. If Compaq tried to sell directly to users to compete with Dell, the big box retailers threatened to pull Compaq towers off their shelves entirely. And in 1997, losing the retail shelf still meant losing the mainstream American market. So Compaq kept feeding the stores. To maintain their dominant market share against Dell and an influx of ultra-cheap Asian imports, Compaq was forced to participate in a devastating race to the bottom. In 1997, a new category erupted in the American market, the sub-$1,000 PC. Brands like eMachines and Packard Bell flooded mall electronics stores with deeply discounted beige boxes. To protect their shelf space, Compaq launched the Presario 2000 series, pricing it aggressively under $1,000. The strategy worked, but only on the surface. Compaq sold millions of units. Their market share remained massive, but the profit margins on these cheap machines were virtually non-existent. Compaq was moving mountains of plastic, glass, and silicon across the American continent, paying for massive advertising campaigns and compensating retailers for unsold inventory just to break even. The physical reality of the Wintel standard had turned against them, because Compaq had forced the industry to adopt open, standard parts a decade earlier. A Compaq machine was now fundamentally identical to a Dell, a Gateway, or a Packard Bell. The operating system belonged to Microsoft. The processor belonged to Intel. Compaq only owned the beige plastic case and the retail logistics. The American consumer had learned that the brand on the outside of the box no longer dictated the power on the inside. By early 1998, CEO Eckhard Pfeiffer recognized that the traditional desktop computer was rapidly becoming a low-margin commodity. You could no longer sustain a massive American tech empire simply by selling cheap hardware to home users. The real money, the high-margin, sticky revenue, was locked inside corporate server rooms and enterprise IT services. IBM, the giant Compaq had humbled a decade earlier, had already successfully pivoted away from consumer hardware and transformed itself into a highly profitable global services company. Pfeiffer decided Compaq had to do the same. They needed to escape the brutal retail price wars and become a supreme enterprise computing powerhouse. But building a global IT services division from scratch would take years that Compaq did not have. To survive the commoditization of the PC, they would have to buy their way out. Compaq looked toward the East Coast, targeting one of the oldest and proudest names in American computing, unaware that this decision would trigger the final collapse of their empire. The corporate acquisition that was supposed to save Compaq became the anchor that dragged them under. In January 1998, Compaq made a fateful, multi-billion-dollar bet. They announced the acquisition of Digital Equipment Corporation, commonly known as DEC, for $9.6 billion. It was the largest tech merger in American history up to that point. DEC was a legendary pioneer of the American mini-computer era, possessing massive enterprise patents, a global service network, and deep engineering talent. But by 1998, DEC was a wounded corporate giant, weighed down by bloated operating costs and an aging legacy system that the market had already abandoned. Compaq believed they could absorb DEC's enterprise service division and instantly transform into a global corporate IT powerhouse that could rival IBM. Instead, the merger triggered a catastrophic cultural and structural collapse. The integration was a disaster from day one. Compaq's aggressive, fast-moving Texas hardware culture clashed violently with DEC's entrenched, bureaucratic Boston engineering culture. Thousands of jobs were cut, senior executives fled, and billions of dollars in enterprise accounts were lost in the confusion. While Compaq's leadership was consumed by internal turf wars and corporate restructuring, Dell was relentlessly capturing the corporate desktop and server market with its ruthlessly efficient direct sales model. The financial bleeding was immediate and brutal. Compaq's profit margins evaporated. The billions of dollars generated during the mid-90s boom were swallowed by severance packages, redundant facilities, and falling hardware prices. In July 1999, in a desperate attempt to reset the company's direction, Compaq's board ousted CEO Eckhard Pfeiffer. But changing the leadership at the top could not reverse the crushing physical reality of the market forces chewing away at the company's foundation. The Wintel standard that Compaq had fought so hard to build had matured into a brutal commodity trap. A personal computer was no longer a high-value technological marvel. It was a cheap, disposable appliance, sold on thin margins in big-box electronics stores alongside kitchen blenders and vacuum cleaners. By the turn of the millennium, the signs of terminal decline were visible in every corner of the American retail landscape. The store shelves changed. The profit margins vanished. The enterprise clients migrated. The direct sales competitors dominated. The leadership fractured. The brand lost its premium meaning. The stock price collapsed. The independent dealers closed their doors. The logo remained on millions of desks. The independent empire was gone. In September 2001, just as the American technology sector was reeling from the dot-com crash, Hewlett-Packard announced a staggering $25 billion deal to acquire Compaq. The merger was met with fierce internal resistance, led most notably by Walter Hewlett, son of HP co-founder William Hewlett, who argued that buying a low-margin PC manufacturer would drag down HP's profitable printer and imaging business. A bitter, high-stakes proxy battle played out across American financial news networks, pitting management against angry shareholders. But the vote narrowly passed. In May 2002, the acquisition was finalized. Compaq Computer Corporation formally ceased to exist as an independent legal entity. The corporate headquarters in Houston were demoted to a regional division office. The iconic red and white Compaq logo was slowly phased out of national television commercials and billboard campaigns, making way for the unified Hewlett-Packard brand. The company that had reverse-engineered IBM's secret code, built the modern Wintel standard, and carried America into the digital age, had been absorbed into a corporate ledger. The physical remains of Compaq Computer Corporation are difficult to find in modern America. If you walk into a contemporary suburban office park or a modern technology campus in Houston, Texas, the vast manufacturing plants where millions of beige towers were once assembled have long since been repurposed, demolished, or swallowed by newer real estate developments. The red and white Compaq logo, once as familiar to American consumers as the Coca-Cola script or the Nike swoosh, has vanished from television commercials, magazine back covers, and retail electronics circulars. The company was formally absorbed into Hewlett-Packard, and the brand name itself was slowly phased out, relegated to a historical footnote in corporate textbooks. Yet the legacy of Compaq is not measured by the survival of a trademark. It is measured by the entire architecture of modern computing. When Compaq reverse-engineered the IBM BIOS in a Houston hotel room and proved that a computer could be 100% compatible without paying tribute to IBM, they permanently shattered the era of closed, proprietary computer systems. They created the open hardware standard that allowed any manufacturer to build a desktop, any software developer to write an application, and any American family to buy a machine without being locked into a single corporate ecosystem. Without Compaq's aggressive rebellion in the late 1980s, the rise of the Wintel standard, the alliance of Windows and Intel that powered the global internet, would have looked entirely different. They proved that software and microprocessors mattered more than the metal box encasing them, unknowingly writing the exact blueprint for their own eventual decline. Today, Compaq survives in the preservation community and the quiet corners of American nostalgia. In suburban basements, vintage computer hobbyists and preservation groups carefully clean yellowed plastic cases, solder replacement capacitors onto vintage motherboards, and fire up old CRT monitors to hear the heavy hum of a Desk Pro booting into MS-DOS, or Windows 95. On online collector forums, former engineers and loyal users share scanned manuals, original floppy disk images, and stories of the days when buying a computer was a major household event that required a trip to a physical store. These vintage machines are not merely collecting dust. They are physical testaments to an era when technology felt heavy, mechanical, and permanent. This is not nostalgia. An old Compaq Presario tower with its heavy glass screen, mechanical keyboard, and built-in CD-ROM drive is a physical argument about a time when computing required a dedicated place in the American home, before the screen shrank, went wireless, and moved permanently into the pocket. The company is gone. The retail aisles that stocked their boxes have been replaced by e-commerce warehouses. The beige towers have long since been hauled away to e-waste recycling centers. Somewhere in an American desk drawer, an old software installation CD still sits in its cracked plastic case, the surface scratched, the label faded, waiting for a beige machine that no longer turns on. See you in the next video.